Welcome again to Hult Price India. What happens when things go wrong? We all know that social enterprises can go the way that we planned, but we also know that things can go radically wrong. Things that we didn't plan for and which could derail us on the way. And what do we do? I just want to share some of my experiences about some of the things that can go wrong and what you should look out for. So, what should we look at? One is we need to have realistic expectations. We need to learn from failure. I'll talk briefly about what is a pivot and what is the pivot principle. And lastly, the importance of keeping the team together when things go really bad. So, it's important to have a mindset which is tuned to realistic expectations. And what do we mean by realistic expectations? You have to understand that the statistic of failure for startups is about 92%, which means out of every 10 startups, 9 startups don't make it. Okay, they fail along the way. But let me tell you, this is completely avoidable. You don't have to be among the 90%. You can be among the 8% which actually succeed, and it's quite possible to do that if you follow a few simple rules and keep track of a few traps that you might fall into. So remember, failure is not because of lack of motivation or persistence. It's not because of lack of hard work. So I'm sure all of you put in all that. It's because mainly you have unrealistic expectations of what the reality is like. That is what the market is like, what your customers are like, what your financial situation is going to be like, what sort of support you'd like to get from your stakeholders. You need to be very clear and realistic about those things. I understand in a university setup, you may not have had much exposure to the world, the wider world, but as you interact with people in the course of your startup, you will get more experience, and that will help you to calibrate your expectations to bring it in tune with reality. I'll give you some examples. So you may look at perceived options and be over optimistic about the kind of funding you will raise, and then you might find that there's not so much money to work with and you have to work in a much more limited budget. Then you might overestimate the market size. You may find that your product or service is not so popular that it's got an uptake from many customers, and therefore your revenue stream might be less, your impact might be less. You may have to make some changes along the way. You may underestimate the time frames. You may think that it's going to take a short time, but actually it takes much longer. And this is very common. Things do take much longer than you expect. So plan accordingly. And the last and very lethal mistake is the scaling trap, which premature scaling trap, which I must warn you about. When you get your initial success, you want to grow very big and you want to scale. You probably do it in one city or town or village, and you want to take your venture out to, every nook and corner. It doesn't work so fast. Scaling has its own problems. Scaling brings with it an organizational overhead. You've got to build a culture, you've got to build an organization, you've got to work with a lot more people, a lot more stakeholders. There's logistics to be looked at. So don't scale too fast, be cautious. Secondly, you've got to learn from failure. And failure, as I keep repeating, is your constant companion in your startup journey. But it's nothing to really be afraid of. Failure is an opportunity to learn. Uh, I'll give you an example here. This is an example of a real entrepreneur who failed, and then he went back and he succeeded. And he's summarized some of his uh, key tips on what he has learned. So one thing is, make sure your offering is superior across the entire user experience. Very often we don't map the entire user experience. We just look at what we're offering from a single point of view or a single angle. We need to look at the user as a whole entity, a person who will experience our product or service from end to end. So what is the first touch point, and what is every interaction? If it's going to be an app, how are they going to interact with our user interface? If it's going to be a service, what is the process they're going to interact with? Map the entire user experience. The better you do this mapping, the better your overall touch point with the user is going to be, and your offering is going to be better. Second, if you have the opportunity to raise some money, do it. Don't wait until you need the money. Sometimes it's better to raise some money while you can. It's a good rule of the thumb. Then, if you're thinking of making a company and sharing equity, don't give it away too soon. Sometimes people will say they'll give you money, but you give me a lot of equity. It's tempting, but don't do it, because you will need it further down the line. It's good to keep the equity with the founders. Uh, I'm not getting into this because I think at your level, with the stage at which your startups are now, you probably don't have to address this issue immediately. But you may have to take a grant. So remember, every grant, whatever the agency, they do have some terms and conditions. I would encourage you to study what comes with it. So understand what you're getting into when you take the grant, and be prepared. Spend money on development. Always try to improve the quality of your product, the level of your service. Try to give a better experience to your end customer. Don't spend on fancy trimmings. A nice plush office, big staff. If you can't afford these things, you don't do it. Go lean. If you have to travel, take a bus or train. Don't go on airfare. And these are the type of things which you need to keep in mind. So no fancy trimmings initially. When your startup reaches a certain level of traction where you're a little comfortable, you can spend a little more money. Then timing is everything. So if you may have an idea which is very far ahead of your time. I don't know how many of you have actually experienced this. You have a brilliant idea, but you find that when you talk to people, they just don't get it. They just don't understand what you're talking about, and whether they're just not ready. It's nothing wrong with your idea. So you have to be clear that for every idea, every product, there is a timing. There's a time to get into the market, there's a time to grow, there's a time to launch. Sometimes you may have to work with a different idea just because the timing is not right for your pet idea. And the last point he mentions is that you should be selling all the time. Sales is very important. Keep selling not only your idea, your product. Keep talking to people. Keep being a brand ambassador of your startup. Then we come to something which is called the pivot. And this is an important principle which you have to understand. Startups, you begin with an existing idea or plan, and you expect an outcome to come out of it. But that outcome may not happen. It may not happen the way you want, and you may find the plan isn't working. Then what do you do? So you could persist with the plan and keep on trying and invest time, energy, resources into it, which is a waste of money, waste of time, waste of energy. A better way to do it is to move in a new direction, change your goal, change your strategy. And this is called a pivot. So this is just a quote from Harvard Business Review. They've mentioned how Silicon Valley has really been based on great pivots. If you see many of the success stories, and here are some examples. Groupon was a platform for collective action, and today it's a coupon company. You all know Groupon. So it started as something, ended up as something else. PayPal was a technology to beam money between mobile phones and handheld devices. And finally, it turned out into something quite different, into a sort of an online payment, also in the payment industry, but a quite different use case. And Twitter was a podcasting startup. It was never meant to be a microblogging platform, but that's the way it finally evolved. So the final success that you get may happen after 2 or 3 pivots. You will refine your idea, come up with something different, and you never know what clicks in the market. So you have to probably try 2 or 3 things. Remember, social entrepreneurship is not just social service. It's just because you want to do something good does not mean the market is ready to accept what you have to offer. You have to also sell it. You have to make sure customers are ready to receive it. So social enterprise is as much an enterprise as any commercial enterprise, in the sense that you have to sell and you have to be conscious of the market. So remember, pivot is a useful principle and you should deploy it when necessary. So some of the rules is have a compost pile of ideas. So rejected ideas, ideas that you think you don't want to act on right now, file it somewhere, keep a list, put it online. And when things are not working, pull out that list and see if you can reuse or recycle some of those ideas. Know your customers very well. Keep talking to them, get feedback. Your customers will tell you what they want, and that sometimes helps you to refine your ideas. Uh, this is the third thing is the mantra which every entrepreneur will tell you is the key to entrepreneurship. Fail early, fail often, fail cheap. So if you can do this, you will succeed. You will succeed early, you will succeed often, and you will succeed without spending a lot of money. Focus on the customer, not on your product. Okay, for early entrepreneurs, this is a big trap you always fall into. You fall in love with your product. You are so enthusiastic about what you have created that you think that that is going to sell itself. No, it is your customer who is important. It's the customer's needs which is important. And if you have to completely take your product back to the drawing board and start again, do it. But don't fall in love with your product so much that you put your product over the customer. And lastly, don't settle for mediocrity. Remember, we are all in this for excellence. If you're having mediocre success, if you're not making headway in the market, try something else. Try something different. Keep changing your plans. Have a better product. Come up with a different idea. Don't settle for a mediocre success. And when things go wrong, you have to keep the team together. And this is what I would like to stress here. When things go wrong and the plan isn't working, you may have money, you may have a great idea, but it's not going to help you. Your customers will most often run away, they'll desert you. And there's only one thing you can really count on, and that is the founding team. So remember the relationships between the founders, the kind of bonding you have within your team, and the idea that you share, that's going to keep you together. You got to pull together in the same direction, thick or thin, good or bad, whatever happens. So I wish you good luck on this journey. Losers quit after they fail, but winners fail until they succeed.